A part of what I think really makes this song work and be pretty widely appealing, I would say, is that the verse and the chorus are extremely different in nature. And it's not that they don't feel like they belong to the same song necessarily, but if you look at the chorus is extremely poppy in the context of a rock song, a pop rock song, however you want to look at it. But it's got very radio friendly sensibilities, if you will. The chorus is very simple and singable, and it's low, right? In pitch range for a chorus is actually pretty low. It's very sing along kind of chorus. It's not something that people would struggle to sing. Even your parents who can't sing, or your brother who can't sing, or whatever, could sing the chorus of that song. It's very simple. The lyrics are very simple. They're about as simple and straightforward as it gets. I mean, he's everything you want. He's everything you need. He's everything inside of you that you wish you could be. He says all the right things at exactly the right time, and he means nothing to you. He doesn't know why, and you don't know why. Um, could not get simpler and more straightforward. But if we compare that to the lyrics and the musicality of the verses, it's very different. Just taking the first verse lyrically, somewhere there's speaking. It's already coming in. Oh, and it's rising at the back of your mind. You never could get it unless you were fed it. Now you're here and you don't know why. But under skin, knees, and skid marks, past the places where you used to learn, you howl and listen, listen and wait for the echoes of angels who won't return. That is extremely vague, right? I have ideas as to what all of those different elements mean, but it's one of those things that's open enough to interpretation that depending on, where you are in life, you might interpret it a little bit differently. Every time you listen, you might sort of hear a different angle that you could understand it. Who exactly are these angels? What does that represent? Uh, what exactly do the skid marks and skin knees represent? That part I think is a little more straightforward, but the verses, lyrically even, are pretty vague and more poetic, if you will. This is more use of imagery. It's not as super straightforward like, oh, a 3-year-old would understand this. It's something that you can sink your teeth into a little bit more. Whereas the chorus is very simple, right? It's obscuring nothing. It's not vague at all. It's about as not vague as it could possibly get. And then musically, we mentioned how the chorus is something that is, very sort of got pop sensibilities in the sense that, the melody is super simple and super singable. And then we have the verse where we talked about, hey, we got two kind of interesting hooks. We got this electric guitar part that sounds really different from really anything else that I've ever heard. It's one of the more notable parts of that song is that electric guitar riff that just has a totally different sound than anything else. The acoustic guitar part is, it's even that's got an interesting melody built in, which doesn't necessarily make it not pop like, I suppose, but it's kind of got this almost creepy, darker kind of vibe, even kind of like almost half whispers, little grit in there, or a little like whispery grit in there, with even the way that Maskell sings the song. So the two sections are very, very different. And this to me reminds me of things like movies, say like The Dark Knight. That is The Dark Knight would be a genuinely brilliant movie, or really, really good movie that's tackling, deeper themes like the fine line between chaos and order, the important of having principles and restraint, and having, lines in the sand and rules, or lines in the concrete, I don't know, the rules that you will not bend or break, because one of the themes is how Batman easily could become a Joker like figure if he were to compromise on principles. The corruptibility of man, and then the dangers of uh, elevating people to hero status in Harvey Dent, right? Harvey Dent is an example of how, even people who think they're good can be made to be can turn evil given the right circumstances, incentives, etc. Sort of the idea that we all have the capability for great evil within us, and if we believe otherwise, that's incredibly dangerous. because Harvey Dent, the White Knight, turns out even he could be turned by the Joker. So it on the surface is a popcorn flick superhero movie, right? When you think of deep, insightful movies, superhero movies, rightfully, generally, would be one of the last ones that you would think of because they're a sort of the epitome of a blockbuster movie, Transformers kind of thing, like oh, pretty explosions and cool one-liners and all that sort of thing. But really, The Dark Knight has a lot more to it than it would seem, which pretty much everybody recognizes, I think. But on the surface, it sort of masquerades just as a superhero film, but it's actually much more than that. And I think Everything You Want sort of has a similar thing going on, which I think was true of a lot of late 90s, early 2000s music, where there's a lot of songs that it would be easy to write off as, oh, that was like popular and that was on the radio. And it's like, there's actually a lot of interesting things going on in that song. And you just assume because it was on pop radio that it's, poppy and super simple. And, you know, y- we all have these sort of assumptions maybe built in to what pop music is, even though a lot is exactly what we think it is, and some isn't. Some is better than that. But it seems like Everything You Want to me has always been an actually pretty compelling, interesting song that is masquerading just as a pop song. Because boy, that chorus is poppy, and boy, that chorus I mean, it's probably the poppiest thing that Verklerizing has ever written is the chorus to that song. Maybe the chorus of Send It Up, maybe, but it's towards the top for sure. Singable, easy to remember, catchy in a simple way, but the verses offer the opportunity to get more vague, to get more artistic, and to show a little bit more depth to the song than otherwise they would be. And of course, I think too, we've talked before about very often, a breakup song tends to not be interesting. But a breakup song where you get really specific about some element of it can be interesting, right? So this is interesting because it's actually not a breakup song. It's a friend zone song. And I'm sure there's other friend zone songs that probably came before and I'm sure came after as well. But that's more specific and a little bit more interesting because that's not something we've heard a million times. So when writing songs, something that maybe is worth thinking about is depending on what you have in your chorus. Maybe your chorus is really vague and uses a lot of symbolism. And it's a little hard to figure out what really does he mean. Maybe in your verses, write something that's a little more straightforward, use less symbolism. Or you can do the opposite. If you have a chorus that's super clear cut and uses no symbolism and it just tells it like it is, maybe something you can play with is try being more subtle, nuanced, more vague, and leverage symbolism in the verses. You don't need to have the level of poetic language be the same throughout your song if you want to look at it that way. We could maybe have a discussion what poetic language is really, and I think there's a lot more to it than this. But but one of the elements I think is how much you have to think about what something means. And I don't mean that like it's just made up and it's just like, oh, this symbol sounds cool. It has to mean something and be intentional. But I think there's something to be said for, with the verses, say, of this song, there's a lot we could discuss about the nuances of, what are these echoes of angels that keeps being mentioned? The end of verse 1 is echoes of angels who won't return, and then the end of verse 3, which is the last part before it's just the chorus. So bookending the first verse and the last verse. But you never did notice, but you still hide away the anger of angels who won't return. So we have that motif, if you will, of angels who won't return that keeps coming up, right? And you and I might have a different interpretation of that, and they both might be wrong from the standpoint of that's not what Matt Scannell intended. But it's sort of like the top at the end of Inception, right? It gives something to talk about, to sink our teeth into. And then sometimes there are certain things that in order to talk about something at depth, you can't just have, a 60-second video that covers something, right? Everybody wants everything to be 60 seconds now. But the reality is that some things just are deeper and more nuanced. And sometimes the way to arrive at the truth of a thing, it's easier to actually tell a story that indirectly answers the question than it is to directly answer, you know, directly answer a question. So in songs, think about how you can play one section off of another. Oftentimes, I think where songs tend to go wrong is the whole song is just so vague that you're like, nobody could even possibly know what this song is about. The darker the rock music gets, to me, the tendency is that it goes down that road. So much of like death metal kind of stuff is like these lyrics are totally incoherent. They don't mean they're just like the black sun draineth from the sky as the blood. It's just like that's just it doesn't. I doubt it means anything. And if it does, there's no way somebody could get really any. You can just totally make up the meaning of the song. The whole song, it's vague what it's about. And then if you make everything too easily accessible, there's not as much to dig your teeth into, to discuss, to think about, to dwell on. We could probably spend an hour just thinking about those angels who won't return and what really that means, or different things it could mean and the repercussions of each, just like the top at the end of Inception. Give something to talk about. So I think sometimes the best way might be a little bit of both. Because if it's so vague all the time, people can be suspicious. Does this mean anything at all? And if it's all straightforward, there's a little bit less to talk about. Hey friend, if you found this helpful, then something else you'll likely find helpful is my free cheat sheet on 20 different ways to start writing a song. One of the easiest ways to avoid writer's block and make sure our songs don't all sound the same is just to change up how we start our song. So if you're ready to write your next great song, be sure to check it out at songwritertheory.com/free guide.